This is our union, 65,000 strong and growing. The seeds were planted many years ago. We've made it stronger. We've helped it grow. We've reaped the benefits and enjoyed many rewards. Our victories are Alberta's victories. We'll shape its future, so let's honor the past.
They did not know the future, at least they knew their past. Gathered with their loved ones and they tried to make the best. And they called out for the music, danced until the dawn, prayed for peace and plenty in the new day coming on. By the time that I was 20, the Great War had come and gone. In its wake, a tragedy, melodies unsung.
It's 1919. The war that has gripped the world is over. The time is ripe to rebuild and refocus. In Alberta, the economy is booming. Cities are growing, and there's optimism in the air. Wages are rising for everyone. Almost everyone. Government workers have a different story. Your wages are falling behind, and it's harder and harder to make ends meet. Unless you have friends in high places, you'll never get a raise or a promotion. March 26th. A small group of government workers meet in the basement of this church. Under the legislation of the day, they could be fired for what they're doing.
Under the old master-servant law, a servant was somebody who would behave like you'd expect a servant to behave. You wouldn't ask your master for anything. You'd sort of take what your master gave you. Whereas an employee is a different kettle of fish. An employee works under a contract of employment. An employee knows that he or she has rights.
A civil servant had no rights to negotiate or could be fired for even asking for a raise in pay.
Provincial government employees had all sorts of concerns. They realized that they couldn't address them individually, so they decided to get together and address them collectively.
The Civil Service Association of Alberta is born. Their motto, unity, strength, protection.
They were a fairly courageous group too, because they must have known that most of the politicians wouldn't like that at all.
Despite government threats that they would be terminated from their jobs for participating, 18 delegates and 11 members of the provincial executive attend the first CSA convention in February of 1921. To these civil servants, it's worth the risk. William Aiken is elected as the first president. The first order of business was to deal with patronage appointments, wages, and benefits.
As a government employee, you waited for the government to recede behind that building there and to pass an order in council that would tell you what you were going to get paid and what the terms and conditions would be for that particular year.
Unlike real trade unions, the CSA doesn't have the right to true collective bargaining. Despite this, they do make significant gains for members. By the 70s, CSA membership nears 30,000. But the golden years of economic growth in the province were nearing the end of their cycle. There's a lot of belt-tightening, and often the government's own employees are the first to feel the pinch. People who were once nice, meek civil servants didn't feel like being nice, meek civil servants anymore.
You also had an end of that age where employers could pretty well pay whatever they wanted to get employees. Things were starting to tighten up a little bit, and I think that they were tightening up in the government quite a bit too. So when the government tried to tighten the strings a little further than they should, people started going on strike. They started challenging the government on all sorts of grounds.
In 1974, any CSA member who chooses job action is essentially breaking the law. Don't count on labor relations support to come in and back you up. Don't count on due process in the courts. Essentially, you are breaking the law.
The servants got downright uncivil at that point. They went on one strike action after another. After several short strikes, 12,500 government workers went off on strike at the same time. That probably more than anything got the government to consider the possibility that maybe they should pass a law that made this association into a trade union and deal with them that way.
In 1976, the CSA applies for recognition as a bona fide trade union, the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. By then, workers in other industries had already enjoyed 3 decades of full bargaining rights. For the fledgling union, it couldn't have been a worse time to begin. AUPE had to learn fast to survive and maintain its integrity as a trade union for its members. Bill Broad leads the organization through its transformation from a social club to a union with some teeth. The federal government had just instituted wage and price controls, and the Alberta government had enacted the most restrictive labor act in the country, PSERA, which again restricted government employees from acting like a trade union and enjoying the same rights as other workers. Under fiery President John Booth, AUPE begins to develop its identity as a tough union that has its eye on the bigger picture, while getting the best deals for its members. It promises support for any union member who wishes to run for election. It learns the power of the press and the importance of using public opinion to advance the issues. It's not afraid to challenge the government in court, and it takes the issue of freedom of association before the International Labour Organization. Most significant, perhaps, AUPE establishes union stewards as fully authorized worksite representatives and institutes an educational program to train them.
Articles.
In 1977, they also set a first in Canada. As their momentum grows, so does their membership, almost 43,000, half of them women. By convention of 1979, AUPE is ready to take back some of the ground they lost during wage and price controls. When the government sets their employees' raises at 7.5% to 9% and gives themselves a 47% raise, the stage is set for a showdown.
When questioned as to how they could justify limiting their own employees to 7.5% and 9% when they were raising their own pay 47%, one of the ministers said, well, comparing our pay to the pay of government employees is like comparing apples and oranges. And our members were mad. They were really angry. It was not only disrespectful, it was unfair. They could see that even though they had won the right to be a union, that they still weren't being given the right to bargain collectively, that wages and terms and conditions were still going to be set by order and council like they were in the good old days.
4,000 members walk off the job. Their wildcat strike lasts 3 weeks before the government goes back to the bargaining table. AUPE effectively challenged rigged arbitration rules and the ban on strikes. People sit up and take notice that this union had really taken on the issue of wage and price controls and done something about it.
Our strike in 1980 was a front-page story. And people were starting to sympathize with us just a little bit because they were starting to feel the pinch also. And they saw that government employees were taking on wage controls. We became more politically astute then, and we became more politically active. Government took us seriously. We made all sorts of gains. Our membership shot way up because people could see that we were the union of choice. We went up from something like 45,000 to about 52,000 in a year and a half.
New headquarters are built and regional offices are open throughout the province. But this period of growth and optimism was not to last.
We cannot seek a future till we know our past. Gather with our loved ones and we try to make the best. And we call out for the music, dancing till the dawn. Pray for peace and plenty in the new day coming on. Work for peace and plenty in the new day coming on.
Over the next 10 years, AUPE fights for its life as the government's aggressive policies of privatization, deregulation, and belt-tightening decimates the membership, demoralizes the workers, and nearly forces the union into bankruptcy. Negotiating is tough, but AUPE works hard to offer support for their members by securing initiatives like early retirement incentives, voluntary job sharing, re-employment counseling, and decent severance packages. In 1 year alone, AUPE files over 1,000 grievances on behalf of its members.
At first, people would argue that these civil servants were only interested in earning higher pay increases. And gradually they began to realize that we were the ones who were highlighting the effects of all this privatization, these cutbacks and contracting out experiments that the government of Alberta was running. It was as if there was an animosity by the government towards its own workers. There was a period of time, especially in the early 90s, when government began to talk as if people who worked for the government were almost stealing their paychecks. How dare you be a government employee, taking the public's money in the way you're taking it? And so when that started happening, the union ran a whole lot of campaigns showing the public what the members are doing, how the members who work for the government of Alberta and who work for the boards and agencies, members of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, actually improve the quality of life in this province. We were the ones who were there, Johnny on the spot, to explain to the public how it was going to cost them. Services are going to be reduced. They were going to start to pay user fees for things that used to be paid for by tax money.
By the time the 90s arrive, the Ralph Klein regime really picked up the pace by announcing a 20% cut across the board, including boards and agencies that depend on the government for their funding. Every government job is an expendable job.
We warned the public what all of this cutting back would amount to, that the Alberta they knew would no longer exist. He held his ground firmly for almost 3 years. It wasn't until November 1995. For all of the union's campaigning, nothing could force Ralph Klein to change his mind.
The tide is finally turned by a small group of workers from the Foothills Hospital in Calgary. They are the lowest paid workers in the hospital. Weeks before, they had accepted wage concessions in order to keep their jobs. And now there was talk that they'd be next to go. They'd simply had enough. They walk off the job.
The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees had locals that joined them on the picket line. There was going to be a shutdown of hospitals pretty quickly over this issue. The public in Calgary would not normally support a strike at the hospital. But in this case, all of them were honking their horns and showing their thumbs up, and the media reported, without exception, that this was the first time they saw Ralph Klein blink.
Dan McLennan is elected president. The union's fortunes and reputation continue to improve, which ushers in a new cycle of growth and prosperity for the union.
Suddenly, we were one of the most visible organizations in the province, and that seemed to have a real effect. Because from then on, everything got better. It seemed that bargaining got easier, not immediately, but the trend down had been reversed, and we were moving back upwards again.
Employers don't take you seriously if they know they can bankrupt you, and they're not going to respect you because you can get a $400,000 fine or $1 million fine, and the union has to be in a position to write the check. And until the members voted on a dues increase in 1997, this union couldn't write a check for almost anything. And you go to a convention and say, look, you know, these people sitting on the left or the right or the middle, if they can do that, you can do it too. So I think the union's changed in that there's some really good examples of heroes who stood up. In bargaining, the employer knows whether or not you've got support, and they're not afraid to challenge you. And when you can stand up, you can win.
Members are seeing that they are the union, and that it's up to them to build the union and to take the province along with them.
We are the union. It's up to us to build the union, just like the members who met back in 1919 to decide that they were going to form an association. Just like their actions through all of the years that took us to the place that we are today. Our actions today are going to determine what tomorrow will look like.
Now some of us have plenty, some of us have peace. Most of us are struggling for a little bit of each. Come and take my hand and we'll dance until the dawn. Work for peace and plenty in the new day coming on. We cannot seek a future till we know our past. Gather with our loved ones and we try to make the best. And we call out for the music, dance until the dawn. Pray for peace and plenty in the new day coming on. Work for peace and